I saw hell when I stopped breathing, but God pulled me out. Ex-Atheist testimony. Before listening to this powerful testimony, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Here we share real stories that reveal God's power and presence. Get ready. This testimony will touch your heart. I grew up in a house where the name of God was almost never mentioned. There was no Bible on the table, no prayers before bed, no church on Sundays. To me, religion was something I only saw in movies or when neighbors talked about their traditions. My parents believed that faith was just a distraction, a crutch for people who couldn't handle reality. So from a very young age, I learned to see religion as irrelevant, even unnecessary. Life, I was taught, was about working hard, being practical, and not wasting time on invisible things. When other kids in school talked about going to Sunday school, I couldn't relate. They spoke of Jesus like he was someone real, someone close, and I couldn't help but laugh inside. To me, it sounded like they were holding on to fairy tales. I would hear them share stories about miracles or prayers answered, and I thought, they're just imagining things. I didn't feel jealous, only dismissive. It felt like they were clinging to fantasies while I lived in the real world. At home, when the subject of religion ever came up, it was usually with a mocking tone. My father would say things like, people use God as an excuse when they don't understand science. My mother nodded along, reinforcing the idea that only fools wasted their time with faith. Over time, those voices became mine. I absorbed those beliefs so deeply that I never even questioned them. I saw myself as smarter for rejecting faith, even as a child. Holidays came and went without any spiritual meaning. Christmas was about gifts, not Christ. Easter was candy and eggs, not resurrection. We never prayed before meals or gave thanks for what we had. Gratitude was replaced by pride in hard work and human effort. I grew up believing that whatever we had was earned, not given. If someone was poor or struggling, the idea wasn't to pray for them, but to tell them to work harder. That was the mindset I inherited from my home. Sometimes I would hear distant relatives mention God, and it made me uncomfortable. It felt like they were speaking a different language. I couldn't understand how educated people could believe in an invisible being. I would smile politely, but inside I thought they were naive. Faith seemed like a weakness, something that stripped people of independence. I wanted to be strong, to rely on myself, and religion seemed like the opposite of that. Even as a child, I developed a sense of superiority over those who prayed. When classmates shared stories about going to church, I quietly judged them. I thought, they'll grow out of it once they get older and smarter. I didn't realize then how deep faith could be, or how much strength it could give someone. To me, faith was just pretending. My young mind was already locked in a cycle of skepticism and pride, and I carried it like a badge. The Bible itself was nothing more than a dusty book in my eyes. I remember once opening a copy in my grandparents' house and not making sense of a single word. The language felt old, confusing, and meaningless. I quickly tossed it aside, convinced it had no value. When my grandmother prayed at night, I thought she was just talking to herself. It felt strange, even sad, to see her kneeling, whispering words to a God I believed wasn't listening. Because of that environment, I never built any sense of the spiritual. I believed only in what I could see, touch, and measure. The invisible world was just imagination, and I had no patience for it. Whenever teachers or friends mentioned faith, I rolled my eyes. I was too young to realize that my rejection wasn't based on truth, but on what I had been taught. I didn't seek answers. I simply accepted the idea that faith was useless. Looking back, I realized how much of my childhood was marked by emptiness, though I didn't see it then. Without faith, I relied only on myself, on knowledge, and on logic. As a child, it felt fine, even empowering. But deep inside, there were quiet moments of loneliness, moments when I wondered if there was something more. At the time, I silenced those thoughts quickly. afraid to admit they existed. So my childhood passed without prayer, without belief, without any awareness of God's presence. I built my identity on the idea that faith was for others, not for me. I thought I was too smart to believe in something I couldn't see. That seed of pride planted in those early years would grow stronger as I became a teenager and then an adult. I had no idea how much that foundation would be shaken one day when life forced me to face what I had always denied. As I entered my teenage years, the beliefs I had absorbed as a child only grew stronger. School gave me more vocabulary and arguments to explain what I already thought, that faith was unnecessary and that science had all the answers. I loved the sense of certainty it gave me. Whenever questions about life or death came up in class, I would answer confidently, "When you die, it's over. There's nothing else." I believed it with my whole heart, and I enjoyed the attention I got when people looked at me as the rational one. In high school, I started openly mocking those who spoke about heaven or hell. To me, they were just repeating myths passed down from generations too ignorant to know better. I remember rolling my eyes when a classmate talked about praying before a big exam. I thought, why pray when you can just study harder? It was almost automatic for me to dismiss anything related to God. I wore my skepticism like armor, convinced it made me smarter than the rest. The more I learned about science, the more I used it as a weapon against faith. I would quote things from biology or physics to argue with religious classmates. See, evolution explains it. The universe doesn't need a creator, I would say with pride. I wasn't really seeking truth, I just wanted to win arguments. Each debate fed my ego and reinforced my idea that faith was for the weak. I didn't realize then how shallow my understanding really was. By that time, death was a subject that fascinated me, not because I was afraid of it, but because I thought I had figured it out. In my mind, death was simply the end of consciousness, nothing more. You close your eyes, and it's over, I used to say. Friends who believed in an afterlife made me laugh. To me, they were just scared of the truth. I prided myself on not needing comfort stories. I thought I was strong enough to face the cold reality of nothingness. Sometimes, people asked me if I was afraid of dying. I would shrug and say, why would I be? It's just like going to sleep and never waking up. That answer made me feel brave, even superior. I thought I was stronger than those who needed hope of something beyond. Deep down, I didn't realize that I was avoiding the real weight of the question. I didn't want to admit that the idea of nothing also carried a hidden emptiness inside me. During those teenage years, I built a reputation among my peers. I was the one who had quick comebacks whenever someone mentioned God. Teachers sometimes praised me for being logical and skeptical. I fed on that praise, and it made me push even harder against anything religious. I saw faith as childish, and I thought that eventually everyone would grow out of it, like they grew out of fairy tales. I couldn't imagine that faith might have depth I didn't see. Still, every now and then something would happen that I couldn't fully explain. A moment of awe looking at the night sky, or a strange feeling when someone prayed sincerely in front of me. But I brushed those moments aside quickly. I told myself they were just emotions, nothing more. I was too proud to admit that something deep inside me was curious. My shield of science and logic didn't leave room for wonder or mystery. I remember once being invited to a youth group by a friend. They sang songs, prayed, and shared personal stories of how they felt God in their lives. I sat in the back, arms crossed, smirking. I thought, this is all in their heads. They're just emotional. But as much as I mocked it, a small part of me wondered what they were experiencing that I couldn't. I shut that thought down quickly, afraid to let it linger. Looking back, I can see that my teenage years were marked by arrogance. I wasn't really seeking truth, only protecting my pride. I wanted to be seen as the one who had it all figured out. My rejection of God wasn't just intellectual, it was personal. I didn't want there to be a higher power, because that would mean I wasn't in control. I clung tightly to my independence, convinced it was strength. So I entered adulthood with a hardened heart, fully convinced that science was enough and that faith was a crutch for the weak. Death, in my mind, was nothing but silence. God, I thought, was just a story. That confidence carried me forward, but underneath it a quiet emptiness was growing. I didn't realize yet that life would one day confront me with realities I couldn't dismiss, and my proud certainty would be shaken to its core. As I stepped into adulthood, my sense of superiority over believers grew even stronger. I saw myself as a man of reason, someone who didn't fall for old myths or traditions. Whenever conversations about faith came up, I would lean back, smirk, and throw out a clever remark to silence the believer. I felt proud of my ability to make others doubt themselves. It wasn't enough for me to quietly disbelieve. I needed to show others that I was smarter because of it. In the workplace, when colleagues mentioned going to church or praying for guidance, I always found a way to mock it. Sometimes it was just a sarcastic joke, other times a bold statement like, "Do you really believe in fairy tales?" People laughed nervously, some rolled their eyes, but I enjoyed the attention. It gave me a sense of power to ridicule something that so many people held sacred. To me, it proved that I was braver than them, willing to face reality without hiding behind faith. Heaven and hell were my favorite targets. I loved pointing out how ridiculous it sounded that people believed in eternal destinations after death. Think logically, I would say. When your body stops, that's it. There is no afterlife. It's just biology. I would watch their faces, sometimes seeing the hurt in their eyes, but I didn't care. I thought I was doing them a favor by pushing them toward what I saw as truth. In reality, I was just feeding my pride. Miracles, too, were something I openly ridiculed. When someone shared a story of healing or divine intervention, I dismissed it as coincidence or exaggeration. The brain plays tricks on people, I would say, acting like I had all the answers. I thought it was laughable that educated adults could believe God was involved in their everyday lives. The word miracle became a joke to me, something to mock whenever the chance came up. Over time, mocking believers became almost like a sport. It was a way to show off my intelligence, to reinforce my image as the rational one. I didn't realize then how much of it came from insecurity, from a need to feel superior. I built my identity on not believing, on being the one who stood against faith. The more confident I acted, the more people assumed I had everything figured out. Deep inside, I avoided any thought that might challenge my certainty. I prided myself on my ability to argue. I memorized scientific facts, historical criticisms of religion, and clever comebacks. When someone brought up the Bible, I was ready with contradictions or jokes. If they talked about prayer, I asked them why God didn't answer every request. If they mentioned suffering, I asked why a good God would allow pain. I thought I was destroying their arguments, but I wasn't searching for truth. I was only protecting my ego. Friends who believed tried to reach out to me, but I brushed them off. I would say things like, "Believe whatever helps you sleep at night," as if I was the strong one who needed no comfort. I didn't understand that I was running from something deeper, something inside me I didn't want to face. Instead, I doubled down on my mockery because laughter felt easier than admitting doubt. Pride kept me blind. I became so identified with my atheism that I didn't even question it anymore. I was sure that I was right, that there was nothing beyond what I could see and measure. When people talked about feeling God's presence, I dismissed it as psychology or emotion. When someone mentioned heaven or hell, I thought of it as medieval superstition. My disbelief wasn't just a choice, it had become my identity, my pride, my shield. Looking back, I can see how arrogant I was. At the time, though, I thought I was enlightened. I thought I was living in freedom, free from the chains of religion. What I didn't see was how bound I was by my own pride, how trapped I was in the belief that I had all the answers. I mocked faith because I feared facing the possibility that I might be wrong, Pride had blinded me to the truth. That pride became the foundation of my adult life. I carried it into every conversation, every decision, every argument. I thought I was unshakable. I thought I was untouchable. But life has a way of humbling even the proudest heart. I didn't know then that my confidence would one day be shattered, and the very things I laughed at would become the truth I could no longer deny. It happened on a day that began like any other. There was nothing unusual about it, nothing that hinted at how quickly everything would change. I woke up, went through my routine, and felt in control, as I always did. Life seemed predictable, manageable, under my command. But by the end of that day, I would face something that stripped me of all illusions of control. I didn't know it then, but I was walking straight into a moment that would challenge everything I believed. I was at home when it started. 1 minute I was fine. The next, I felt a strange tightness in my chest. At first I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was tired or stressed. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was nothing serious. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew worse. Breathing suddenly felt heavy, like the air around me had thickened. Panic started to creep in, but I forced myself to stay calm, convinced it would pass. Instead of easing up, the sensation intensified. My lungs felt as though they were locking up, refusing to let in enough air. I tried taking deep breaths, but each one was shorter than the last, shallow and unsatisfying. The fear I always mocked in others suddenly became my reality. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was terribly wrong. For the first time in years, I felt powerless, and it terrified me. I remember clutching at my chest, stumbling toward the kitchen counter for support. The room seemed to tilt, and my vision blurred. The thought flashed in my mind, what if I die right here? I had always dismissed death as nothingness, but suddenly the idea wasn't abstract. It was real, immediate, pressing against me. I tried to push the thought away, but I couldn't escape the rising panic inside me. I tried to call for help, but my voice came out weak, almost a whisper. My body betrayed me. The rational, proud man who thought he had all the answers was gasping for air like a drowning child. Each second felt heavier, the walls closing in tighter. My heart raced, pounding as though it wanted to burst. I felt trapped inside my own body, a prisoner of something I couldn't control. The fear grew unbearable. My mind raced through excuses. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe just anxiety. But deep down, I knew this was different. This wasn't just in my head. My body was shutting down, and I couldn't stop it. For the first time, science and logic offered me nothing. No quick explanation, no instant solution, just fear, just the raw, undeniable reality of my own weakness. As I gasped for air, I stumbled toward the phone. My hands trembled as I tried to dial for help. Each second felt like an eternity, each breath shorter than the one before. I'd never felt so vulnerable, so desperate. The man who laughed at prayer was now silently begging for relief. Though I didn't dare call it prayer, I still clung to pride, even as my body betrayed me. I collapsed onto the floor, the phone slipping from my hands. The edges of the room began to fade, shadows creeping in. I could hear the faint ringing of my heartbeat in my ears, uneven and terrifying. My chest burned, my lungs screamed, but no air seemed to fill them. The world around me dimmed as though I was being pulled into another place. I was terrified, but there was nothing I could do. In those final moments of consciousness, all my old certainties mocked me. The words I had repeated, "When you die, it's over," echoed in my mind. But instead of comfort, they brought dread. What if I was wrong? What if there was more waiting beyond this? The question hit me like a thunderclap, and I had no answers. I tried to push the thought away, but darkness swallowed me before I could. That was the moment everything changed. One breath I was in my home, struggling and terrified, and the next I was somewhere else entirely. My body lay on the floor, but I was no longer aware of it. I had crossed a threshold I didn't believe even existed. My rational mind had no explanation, no defense. All I knew was that I had stepped into something I had spent my whole life denying. I remember the exact sensation of my body starting to give out. My arms felt heavy, my legs weak, as if every ounce of strength was draining from me at once. My chest rose and fell rapidly, each breath shorter than the last, like I was sucking air through a straw. Panic spread through me, sharp and merciless. For the first time in my life, I realized that my own body was not under my control. I was fighting just to do something I had always taken for granted: breathe. Every second became a battle. I forced myself to stay upright, leaning against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. But the harder I tried, the worse it became. It felt like my lungs were collapsing, refusing to cooperate. My mind screamed for oxygen, but my body wouldn't respond. I thought, this can't be happening, not to me. Yet no matter how hard I resisted, I couldn't change it. My strength was slipping through my fingers. The fear inside me grew louder than any logical thought. My chest tightened like an iron band was wrapped around it. My vision blurred, and spots danced before my eyes. I reached out, desperate to hold on to something solid, but everything felt distant and unstable. I could hear the ragged sound of my own gasps echoing in the silence of the room. It was a sound I had never made before, raw and primal, a sound of survival. I tried to convince myself it was temporary, that it would pass if I just stayed calm. But calm was impossible. Each moment felt heavier, like the world was crushing me from every side. My rational mind, the one I prided myself on, offered me nothing. Science didn't tell me how to stop the fear. Logic couldn't explain the overwhelming sense that I was slipping into something final. My pride had no defense against the terror that gripped me. I sank to my knees, clutching my chest as if that could force air into my lungs. My body trembled violently, sweat dripping down my face. I was a grown man, but I felt as helpless as a child. I wanted someone, anyone, to be there, but I was alone. Alone with my fear, alone with my failing body, alone with the reality that death might be closer than I ever imagined. Still, some part of me resisted. I didn't want to surrender. I forced myself to inhale again and again, even as each breath grew weaker. My willpower screamed, "Keep going, don't stop!" But my body was crumbling. Every gasp felt like it might be the last. My pride told me I could fight through it, but the truth was undeniable. I was losing. The world around me dimmed, but my thoughts raced. I remembered conversations where I had mocked people for praying in moments of crisis. I had said, "It's just desperation. Science saves you, not God." And now here I was, desperate, with science nowhere to be found. I had nothing to cling to but raw willpower, and it was failing me. The irony cut deep, even in those frantic moments. As I lay there gasping, a strange awareness settled in. I was staring at the edge of something I didn't understand. The certainty I had always spoken with crumbled under the weight of fear. What if I was wrong? The thought pierced through me like a blade. I didn't want to admit it, but the possibility haunted me. Was I really about to find out what happens after death? My breaths grew shallower, each one shorter than the last. My chest barely rose anymore, and my head grew light, spinning out of control. My hands shook violently, clawing at the floor, as if holding onto it would keep me in this world. The edges of my vision closed in like curtains drawing tight. I was still resisting, still fighting with all that I had left, but deep down I knew the fight was almost over. That moment felt endless. Fear swallowed me whole, but my stubbornness refused to let go. I didn't want to surrender to the darkness, yet I could feel it pulling me closer with every failing breath. My body was weak, my mind frantic, but a tiny part of me still screamed, "Not yet, not like this." I resisted with everything in me, but resistance wasn't enough. The darkness was coming, whether I believed in it or not. The moment finally came when my strength broke. My arms collapsed beneath me, and I could no longer fight to stay upright. My vision narrowed until it was nothing but a tunnel of darkness, and the last fragments of light slipped away. My body gave in, heavy and unresponsive. I remember the exact second when I realized I could not breathe anymore. Then everything went silent. I fell into what felt like nothingness, a void I couldn't describe. From the outside, I was told later, my body slumped and became still. My lips turned pale, my chest stopped rising, and panic filled the room. My family rushed to my side, their voices breaking in desperation, calling my name, begging me to wake up. Someone dialed emergency services, and soon there were frantic hands pressing against me, shaking me, trying to pull me back. But none of that reached me. I was gone. I didn't hear their cries, nor the commotion around me. It was as if a wall had been built between me and the world I once knew. My body remained there, surrounded by people fighting to save it, but I was no longer inside. I was detached, drifting away, unable to control what was happening. For all my confidence in science and reason, I couldn't explain where I had gone or why. I only knew I wasn't where I used to be. The strangest part was the absence of pain. My lungs no longer burned, my chest no longer ached, and the panic that had consumed me faded away. In its place was an eerie calm, a stillness that felt unnatural. I wasn't floating in a peaceful dream. I was suspended in an unknown reality. A part of me wanted to believe it was just unconsciousness, but something deeper told me this was different. I had crossed a line. Time became meaningless. I couldn't tell if seconds or hours passed. Around my body, people fought desperately. Compressions, voices shouting instructions, machines being prepared. Yet I remained apart from all of it. I wasn't watching with physical eyes, but I was somehow aware of their efforts. It was surreal to realize that my body was there, lifeless, while I continued to exist elsewhere. As my family cried and the medical team worked, I began to drift further. The distance grew, and the voices became fainter. My name was called over and over again, but it was like hearing echoes from another world. I wanted to respond, to return, to say, "I'm still here." But no sound left me. I had no voice, no body, no way to bridge the gap. I was powerless, separated from everything I had known. It dawned on me with a chilling clarity. I had lost control completely. All my life, I had mocked the idea of a soul leaving the body. I used to call it superstition, a comforting fairy tale, but now I was living the very thing I denied. I was outside myself, aware and conscious, but utterly disconnected. My arrogance had no words in this place. My pride had no answers. In those moments, I began to feel a pull, subtle but irresistible. It wasn't physical, yet it drew me away from the place where my body lay. The efforts of the doctors faded into the background as something else demanded my attention. It was a force beyond explanation, leading me toward an unknown destination. Fear began to creep back in, not the fear of dying, but the fear of what came next. I tried to resist, to cling to the familiar world where my loved ones fought for me. But the more I tried, the more I realized I had no choice. Whatever this was, it was stronger than my will. The world of science, logic, and certainty was behind me now. Ahead was something I had spent my entire life denying, a reality I had never prepared for, and I was being taken into it whether I wanted to or not. The cries, the medical efforts, the desperate pleas of my family, all of it grew distant, like fading memories. I had crossed the line between life and death. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't dreaming. I was fully aware, yet utterly powerless. And in that terrifying silence, I realized I was no longer with them. I was somewhere else entirely, and what awaited me would shatter everything I thought I knew. At first, I thought maybe I had simply passed out. But the longer I remained, the more I realized this wasn't unconsciousness. I was fully aware of myself, aware that I existed, but everything around me was gone. There was no room, no people, no world, just endless darkness. It wasn't the kind of darkness you experience when you close your eyes. It was thicker, heavier, like a void, swallowing every trace of light. The silence was just as overwhelming. Not a single sound reached me. No echoes, no breaths, no heartbeat, nothing. The absence of sound pressed against me almost like a weight, crushing and suffocating in a way that made me long for even the faintest noise. In life, silence can be peaceful. Here, it was terrifying. It felt eternal, as if I had been abandoned in a place where time itself no longer moved. I stretched my awareness in every direction, desperate to find something, anything, but all I found was emptiness. I could not see my hands, could not feel the ground, could not orient myself in any way. It was as if I had been stripped of every sense, left with only the unbearable fact that I still existed. I wasn't nothing, but I was trapped in nothingness. That realization sent chills through whatever remained of me. The weight of the place was suffocating. It wasn't physical, yet it pressed against me with a force that felt unbearable. My chest didn't rise or fall, yet I felt crushed, as though an invisible burden was pressing down on me. I had always laughed at the idea of hell, of punishment after death, but in that darkness, I couldn't laugh. I couldn't deny the terror seeping into me. I began to wonder if this was all there was, an eternity in the void. The thought gnawed at me, each second stretching endlessly. If death was supposed to be peaceful sleep, this was the exact opposite. There was no rest, no comfort, no relief, just awareness and emptiness. And the longer it went on, the more unbearable it became. I thought I was strong, rational, prepared to face nothingness, but I wasn't. Fear gripped me in a way I had never known before. It wasn't the fear of dying. That part was already done. It was the fear of being stuck, of never escaping this crushing darkness. All my life I had mocked believers for talking about eternity, but here I was, tasting a shadow of it. The emptiness wasn't just around me, it was inside me. It hollowed me out until I felt like nothing but fear. I tried to call out, but no sound came. I tried to move, but there was nothing to move with. I was trapped in myself, desperate for even the smallest sign that I wasn't alone. And that's when the realization struck me harder than anything else. I was completely powerless. For the first time in my life, all my logic, knowledge, and pride meant nothing. None of it could save me from this place. Memories of my arrogance flooded me. How many times I had laughed at people who believed in God. How often I had repeated, "When you die, that's it." Now I was standing in the proof that I had been wrong. My entire worldview crumbled in that void. I wanted to take back my words, to undo the mockery, but it was too late. In the crushing silence, I was left alone with my mistakes. As the darkness pressed deeper, I began to feel that I wasn't just in emptiness. I was being pulled somewhere. There was a weight dragging me down, deeper and deeper into the void. It wasn't random. It felt intentional, like I was being carried to a destination I didn't want to see. My fear grew into dread, and the silence began to feel alive, as if something unseen waited in it. The more I was dragged, the clearer it became. This was no dream. This was no hallucination. I was somewhere real, somewhere beyond life. And for the first time, the question burned inside me. If God was real, then what was waiting for me at the end of this darkness? I had spent a lifetime rejecting him, and now I feared the weight of that rejection was coming due. At first it was only the silence and the crushing darkness, but then faintly, something began to stir. I heard what sounded like distant echoes, so faint I thought my mind was playing tricks. The more I listened, the more the echoes grew sharper. They weren't random sounds, they were cries. Agonizing, endless cries that pierced through the void. My heart, if I still had one, froze. The cries turned into screams, louder and closer, layered upon one another until it was a chorus of torment. I had never heard such suffering. It wasn't like pain from this world. It was deeper, raw, as if the very souls of people were being torn apart. I wanted to cover my ears, but I had no ears to cover. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The sound wrapped around me like chains, and then came the heat. It started subtly like a wave of warm air brushing past me, but it grew quickly, unbearable, suffocating. The kind of heat that doesn't just touch the skin, but burns through to the core. It pressed against me, layer upon layer, until I thought I would be consumed. I could almost smell the thick air, acrid and heavy, though I had no lungs left to breathe it. I began to sense movement in the darkness. Shapes, shadows, presences I could not fully see, but could feel all around me. They circled me, closing in, radiating hatred and malice unlike anything I had ever imagined. Their presence was more terrifying than the heat, more crushing than the void. I knew without anyone telling me these were not human. These were not friends. These were beings of torment. Every instinct in me screamed that they wanted me. They weren't just wandering shadows. They were aware of me, hungry for me. Their attention fell on me like a predator staring at prey. I could feel their hatred sink into my soul, as if my very being was the target of their rage. I wanted to vanish, to disappear, to hide, but there was no hiding. I was fully exposed in their presence. The screams grew louder, and I realized they weren't just around me. They were coming from countless souls trapped in that place. Some cried for mercy, others wailed in despair, but none found relief. It was endless, hopeless suffering. I had denied hell my whole life, brushed it off as a myth, yet here it was, pressing in on me, undeniable and horrifyingly real. The heat intensified until it felt like fire licking against me. I couldn't see flames, but I could feel them. It wasn't fire that destroyed the body, it was fire that consumed the soul. The pain wasn't physical, but it was far worse. It burned through the core of who I was, stripping away every defense, every ounce of pride. I had nothing to stand on, nowhere to escape. The presences drew closer. I could feel their breath, hear their guttural growls, sense their twisted joy at my terror. It was as if they fed on my fear, delighting in it, savoring it. The more I trembled, the stronger they seemed to become. I knew I was powerless before them, and that knowledge only deepened their hold. I had entered their realm, and I was theirs to torment. I tried to call out again, desperate for anyone, for anything, but the void swallowed my cry. It was useless. My whole life I had denied God, mocked him, turned my back. Now, in this moment, I felt the crushing reality of what that meant. If there was no God, then this was all that awaited me, an eternity in the grip of darkness, heat, and torment. And in that despair, for the first time in my life, I felt the tiniest spark of a thought I had always rejected. What if God is real? What if only he can save me from this place? The thought was fragile, almost drowned out by the screams and the heat, but it was there. And I clung to it like a drowning man clings to the faintest hope of rescue. I tried to move, to run, to push myself in any direction, but there was no ground beneath me, no walls, no sky, just endless blackness pressing from every side. Every attempt to escape only brought me back to the same place, surrounded by the same screams, the same unbearable heat. It was like being trapped inside eternity itself. I had never felt so helpless, so small. Panic consumed me. My mind raced for explanations. Maybe this was just my brain misfiring. Maybe it was a dream, some kind of hallucination. But no dream ever felt this real, this heavy, this crushing. This was not a trick of the mind. Deep down, I knew it. I was somewhere beyond the reach of science or reason, and nothing I had once trusted could help me here. The more I realized there was no way out, the more fear gripped me. It wasn't like the fear of dying that had already happened. This was the fear of existing in a nightmare with no escape, no hope, no end. Time stretched into something unrecognizable. Every second felt like a year, every moment a reminder that I was trapped in this torment without a way back. The screams grew sharper, clawing at me from every direction. I felt as though they were inside me, vibrating through whatever remained of my soul. The darkness seemed to tighten around me, pulling me deeper into despair. I tried to cover myself, to shield my mind, but there was nowhere to hide. Fear wasn't just around me anymore. It was inside me, flooding through every part of me. I wanted to fight it, to resist, but I had no strength left. My pride, my certainty, my arrogance, all of it was shattered. I was a man stripped bare, reduced to nothing but terror. The tormenting presences circled closer, mocking me without words, feeding off my despair. I could feel them closing in, waiting for the moment when they would finally tear into me. Hopelessness settled on me heavier than the heat or the screams. It wasn't just fear of pain, it was the realization that I might be here forever. That word echoed inside me, forever. I had mocked believers when they spoke of eternity, but now the reality of it crushed me. The thought of endless darkness, endless torment, endless fear. It broke me in ways I didn't think possible. I tried again to scream, but my voice was swallowed by the void. Nothing answered. No one came. The more I cried out, the more the presences seemed to enjoy my desperation. I could almost sense their laughter, cruel and twisted, as if they knew no one was coming to save me. That realization cut deeper than anything else. I was utterly alone. The weight of that loneliness was unbearable. I thought of my family, of faces I might never see again, and the pain of it was worse than the fire. Memories of my life flashed before me, every wasted moment, every mocking word I had spoken against God. Each memory felt like another chain, dragging me deeper into despair. I had wasted everything. Fear gave way to despair, and despair gave way to a kind of madness. My mind screamed for relief, for an end, for anything but this. But nothing came. The place didn't just trap my body, it trapped my soul, my thoughts, my very being. I couldn't die again, couldn't wake up, couldn't stop existing. I was locked inside a torment without escape. And so, in the middle of that unbearable despair, something inside me finally broke. I realized that if there was no God, then this was my fate forever. But if there was a God, if there was even the smallest chance he was real, then maybe, just maybe, he could reach me here. For the first time in my life, I felt the raw, desperate urge to cry out to the very God I had denied. Somewhere in the middle of that unbearable terror, a memory flashed into my mind so clear it felt like a hand on my shoulder. It was my grandmother's voice, soft, ordinary, the kind of voice you don't notice until you really need it. She used to hum in the kitchen and call me by a silly nickname. She wasn't a loud Christian. She had a quiet, steady faith that never demanded attention. I hadn't thought about her in years, but in that dark place her face came back to me as if she were standing right there. She had said once, almost in passing, "If you ever find yourself with no way out, just call on Jesus." I remembered it as a tiny piece of family advice, the kind you tuck away and forget. Back then I smiled and dismissed it. Nice words for the weak, I thought. But now, with the heat pressing in and the screams all around me, those few words were the only thing that pierced the noise. They didn't sound weird or foreign. They sounded like the last lifeline I could remember. I had mocked those words 1,000 times in real life. I had scoffed at people who clung to phrases and prayers when things got hard. But memory is strange. You don't choose what rises when everything else falls away. Her voice was calm and steady, not frantic. And for the first time I noticed the kindness in the memory, not the superstition. The memory didn't offer proof. It offered a direction, something to try when everything else had failed. For a moment, I resisted. Pride had been my companion for years. It was the coat I wore to all the rooms of my life. I didn't want to be the kind of man who reached for a prayer in panic. Reaching felt like admitting defeat. But the more the darkness clawed at me, the more small, buried things became huge, and my grandmother's simple instruction seemed less like superstition and more like a navigation point in an otherwise mapless place. I pictured her hands, those worn hands that had made soup and mended socks. I imagined her sitting at the edge of a bed, whispering the same words to someone she loved. She had never forced faith on me. She just offered it gently, like a cup of tea. That gentleness made the memory safe enough to hold. It wasn't a sermon. It was a quiet habit of someone who believed quietly and persistently. In that moment, it felt like someone had left a door slightly ajar. The memory wasn't accompanied by any miraculous sign, no trumpet, no heavenly choir. It was just a voice, a face, a phrase that had lodged somewhere in me and now surfaced when I needed it most. I thought about all the times I dismissed my grandmother as naive. Shame washed over me, sharp and hot, even amid the pain. I realized how many small mercies I had shrugged off because they didn't fit my neat, logical world. Still, I hesitated. The place I was in didn't care about my hesitation. It pressed closer as if smelling weakness. But the memory had done its work. It had put a single idea into my mind that I couldn't shake off. If there was even a sliver of a chance that those words could lead somewhere different, wasn't it worth trying? I had nothing left to lose except my pride, and suddenly pride felt like a small price compared to what was around me. So I clung to that memory like a rope. I replayed the cadence of my grandmother's voice, quiet, confident, certain in a way my own certainty had never been. It surprised me how tangible it felt, more real than the screams that tried to swallow me. The contrast was strange, cruelty and comfort sitting side by side in my awareness, and the comfort started to grow, just a little, like the first thin ray of dawn. That memory didn't promise an escape. It didn't explain anything. It only offered a direction to aim my heart, one small act, something to focus on that wasn't despair. In a place that wanted me to succumb, that tiny recollection became the first step toward doing something different. It was the slimmest thread of hope, but hope was something I hadn't had in a long time. For once, clinging to a memory felt less like weakness and more like survival, so I held on to it. I let my grandmother's quiet words become the last thing I could reach for, the single thought I could repeat when everything else had been stripped away. In that place where nothing else made sense, a simple, remembered voice became the beginning of a choice I had never thought I'd make, one that would change everything. In that suffocating darkness, his mind reached a breaking point. The heat, the screams, and the unseen shadows pressing against him left no room for reason. He was collapsing under despair. And yet, in that lowest moment, a faint memory stirred, a voice from his childhood buried for years. It wasn't science, nor logic, nor intellect that surfaced. It was the memory of his grandmother, telling him of a savior he never believed in. That memory broke through the chaos like a whisper of hope. His lips could not form the words. His lungs felt crushed by invisible weight, but inside his heart a thought rose, trembling, uncertain but desperate. Jesus, help me. It wasn't eloquent, it wasn't strong, it wasn't even filled with belief. It was the cry of a drowning man, grasping at a rope he wasn't sure was there. And yet, in that moment, it was enough. That single word carried more weight than a lifetime of doubt. The instant his mind cried out the name of Jesus, something shifted around him. The screams, once deafening, seemed to fade slightly. The heat, though still burning, began to loosen its grip. The presence of evil that had surrounded him recoiled, as if offended by that single plea. He couldn't see it yet, but he knew something had changed. For the first time in what felt like eternity, he felt the smallest spark of hope flicker within him. Still, he doubted. Was this real, or was his mind inventing illusions to survive? All his life he trusted only what could be proven, only what science could explain. But here, in this place beyond reason, no science could help him. His logic had collapsed in the face of torment. And yet, that single cry, Jesus, had done something reason never could. He was caught between disbelief and the undeniable shift he had just felt. The shadows around him grew restless. He could sense their anger, their hatred intensifying. They hissed and moved, as if trying to smother the light he had not yet seen. It was as though the very act of calling on Jesus had marked him, making him untouchable in some new way. But the evil around him wasn't willing to give up easily. The battle wasn't over. He felt the forces of darkness closing in again, determined to crush that fragile faith before it could grow. He remembered his grandmother's words again, clearer this time. Just say his name. He will hear you, even if no one else does. The simplicity of it stunned him. Could salvation really come from a single act of surrender? For years, he mocked such faith as childish, weak, or foolish. But now, standing in the jaws of terror, he had nothing left. Pride was gone. Strength was gone. Only desperation remained, and desperation finally opened the door to faith. He tried again, stronger this time. Jesus! The word echoed not in the air, but in his very being. The darkness trembled. He could feel something breaking. It wasn't just a cry now. It was a plea, a confession, a surrender. With every ounce of his fading strength, he poured that word out, as if his entire existence depended on it. And in truth, it did. For the first time, he was reaching beyond himself, admitting he couldn't save himself. The heat around him broke like shattered glass. A coolness brushed against his face. The suffocating weight lifted from his chest. It wasn't complete deliverance yet, but it was the beginning. The torment no longer felt eternal. Something greater had entered that realm, something that darkness could not withstand. He felt both awe and fear. Awe that it worked, fear that he had waited so long to call. But most of all, relief, real relief, the kind he thought impossible here. In that strange in-between place, he realized something profound. All his life, he prided himself on strength, intellect, and reason. But none of that mattered here. None of it saved him. What saved him was surrender. One act of humility, one desperate cry, carried more power than decades of human pride. He finally understood what his grandmother had tried to tell him. Faith is not about control, but about trust. And trust begins with calling his name. Tears streamed down. Though he had no body, he felt them flow. For the first time, he was not afraid. He still couldn't see the light, but he knew it was coming. The darkness hated it, but he clung to that hope with everything left in him. Jesus, he whispered again, this time not as a skeptic, but as a believer. The torment wasn't gone, but it had lost its grip. His soul had found an anchor, and nothing in hell could tear it away. The moment his desperate whisper reached out once more, everything shifted in an instant. A faint glow pierced the suffocating blackness that had wrapped around him. At first it was small, no larger than the flame of a candle, but even that fragile spark caused the shadows to retreat violently, hissing as if burned. The oppressive weight that had pinned him down began to lift. For the first time since his fall into that abyss, he felt something other than terror. He felt the beginning of peace. The light grew, slow at first, then faster, expanding like dawn breaking over a barren horizon. It wasn't just brightness, it carried warmth, purity, and power. Each inch of radiance drove the darkness farther back, stripping the torment of its strength. The screams that had filled his ears began to fade, replaced by silence, not the cold, crushing silence of despair, but the calm silence of rest. He stood in awe, overwhelmed, unsure if his soul could endure the beauty flooding toward him. The hostile presences that had surrounded him became frantic. He could feel them swirling, desperate to hold on, yet unable to resist the force of the light. They snarled and clawed, but they no longer touched him. It was as if an invisible shield surrounded him, forged not by his will, but by the power of the name he had called. For the first time, he understood. The darkness had never been ultimate. It only ruled because he had rejected the one who could save him. The light wasn't only external, it seeped into him, reaching the very places he had long buried, the wounds of pride, the chains of unbelief, the arrogance that defined his life. All those pieces were laid bare before the brilliance that searched deeper than any eye could see. Yet instead of judgment, he felt love. Instead of condemnation, he felt acceptance. It was a peace so foreign that he nearly wept, realizing that for all his years of denying God, God had never denied him. As the radiance grew stronger, the place around him transformed. What once was suffocating heat now gave way to cool, refreshing air. The stench of decay was replaced by the fragrance of something pure, almost indescribable. He realized he was breathing freely again, no longer fighting for each gasp. Every part of him that had been bound in fear began to relax. It was like being carried in strong arms, safe from harm. A sense of belonging settled over him, something he had never known before. He lifted his eyes and saw it more clearly now. The light wasn't impersonal, like the sun. It was alive. It pulsed, almost like a heartbeat, radiant and near. He sensed a presence within it, a presence that knew him completely. Every secret thought, every failure, every doubt, every cruel word he had spoken against God and believers alike, all of it was exposed. Yet, instead of turning away, the presence embraced him deeper. It was love without condition, forgiveness without demand. That realization broke him. Tears streamed down as his heart surrendered fully. For years he had mocked heaven, denied miracles, and dismissed faith as weakness. But here, in the face of undeniable truth, all his arguments crumbled like dust. None of his knowledge mattered. None of his pride could stand. What mattered was this. In his moment of death, the very God he had rejected reached down into the pit of despair to rescue him. He was undone, yet remade in the same breath. The hostile shadows screeched one last time before scattering completely. He could feel their defeat as they dissolved into nothingness. They no longer had any hold over him. Fear was gone. Pain was gone. All that remained was light, wrapping him like a cloak. He whispered again, Jesus, not in desperation this time, but in awe. The name felt different now, not a last resort, but the anchor of his soul. Each repetition filled him with strength, faith, and a love he had never known. As he stood in that light, peace flooded every corner of his being. The torment that once seemed eternal had been shattered in an instant. He was no longer alone. He was no longer powerless. He was no longer lost in the dark. For the first time he understood that the light wasn't just an escape from hell. It was the very presence of the one he had ignored all his life. And that presence was offering him something greater than survival. It was offering him life. He fell to his knees, overwhelmed, whispering through tears, "Thank you." It was all he could say, all his heart could manage. Gratitude poured out of him, raw and unfiltered. He didn't understand why God had answered him after years of rejection, but he knew one thing. This moment was real, more real than anything he had ever experienced. The peace he felt was unexplainable, but undeniable. The darkness was gone. The light had won. And for the first time, he believed, suddenly, like being yanked from a dream, he felt a violent pull. The warmth of the light began to fade, and the voices of doctors grew louder. His chest heaved as air rushed painfully back into his lungs, eyes shot open, blinded by the harsh hospital lights overhead. For a moment, he didn't understand where he was. The beeping of machines, the frantic shouts of medical staff, and the weight of his own body crashed back into him. He was alive against all odds. His vision blurred, but he could make out faces hovering over him. A doctor shouted something about a pulse returning. A nurse adjusted tubes and wires, and another voice called out the exact minutes he had been gone. They had worked tirelessly, refusing to give up. By every medical standard, he should not have come back. Yet here he was, gasping, trembling, his body drenched in sweat, but undeniably alive. Confusion and wonder fought inside his mind as reality set in. As the chaos settled, he lay still, eyes wide, listening to the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Each beep felt like a miracle, a sound he never thought he would hear again. He knew science had played its role, but deep down, he also knew the truth. It wasn't only the doctors who had brought him back. He remembered too clearly what he had seen, what he had felt, what he had cried out in the darkness. This survival was not just a medical victory, it was grace. His family rushed in moments later, faces streaked with tears, voices breaking with relief. His mother clutched his hand as if she would never let go again. His spouse leaned down, whispering words of love and gratitude. They had feared the worst, already preparing themselves for loss when suddenly a miracle happened. Their joy was overwhelming, but he remained quiet, still processing the truth burning inside him. They didn't know yet what he had experienced beyond the veil. Lying there, he realized how fragile everything truly was. Just minutes without breath had taken him to the edge of eternity. All his years of pride, arguments, and disbelief seemed small compared to the reality he had just lived. He couldn't deny it anymore. There was more than this world. There was a God who had heard him when no one else could. His chest rose and fell with each shaky breath, but inside, his heart was beating with something new: faith. The doctors called his recovery remarkable and unexpected. They discussed medical explanations, adrenaline responses, and timing. But no explanation could erase what he had seen. He didn't argue with them. He simply nodded, letting them believe what they wanted. For him, it wasn't about proving anything. It was about accepting the undeniable truth he had encountered in that place. The light was real, and Jesus had answered his desperate call. As he regained strength, he couldn't help but replay the moment in his mind. The darkness, the torment, the cry for help, and then the sudden flood of peace. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a dream. It had been more vivid than reality itself. The contrast between the suffocating void and the light of love was too great to dismiss. He knew without question he had been spared, pulled from the pit by the one he had denied his entire life. That night, lying in the hospital bed, he closed his eyes, not in fear but in gratitude. For the first time since childhood, he prayed willingly, not out of ritual, but out of truth. His words were clumsy, broken, but sincere. "Thank you for saving me. I don't deserve it, but I'm yours." The peace he had felt in the light returned in a softer way, wrapping around him like a blanket. Sleep came easily, not from exhaustion, but from trust. When morning came, the staff was amazed at how quickly he stabilized. Family members brought flowers, balloons, and laughter, but behind his calm smile, something deeper was stirring. He was no longer the same man who had walked into that hospital days earlier. His worldview had been shattered and rebuilt in the span of minutes. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a man reborn, marked forever by an encounter that science could never explain away. He knew his story wasn't meant to be hidden. People needed to hear it, especially those like him who lived in pride and disbelief. He had mocked faith once, but now he carried testimony of the power of God that no one could take from him. Every heartbeat was proof, every breath was grace. The man who once declared, "There's nothing after death," now lived with unshakable certainty. There is, and God himself had shown him the way back. The first days after leaving the hospital were filled with silence. He wasn't ready to talk about what had happened, not even with his family. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see the darkness, hear the cries, and then feel the overwhelming light that had pulled him back. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't his mind playing tricks on him. He had been somewhere beyond this life. That reality left him shaken to the core, and no explanation could erase it. He found himself staring at simple things with new eyes. The sky, the sound of birds, the laughter of his daughter. Each detail felt like a miracle he had overlooked his entire life. Once, he thought these were just random parts of nature, nothing more. Now, he saw them as gifts. Each moment carried weight, each breath felt sacred. The man who once lived arrogantly certain of science alone was now humbled by the mystery of God's presence in everything. His family noticed the difference immediately. The once skeptical, sometimes dismissive man was quieter, softer, and strangely peaceful. When his daughter asked if he was okay, He hugged her tighter than ever before and whispered, "I'll never take you for granted again." His wife noticed he no longer argued about faith at the dinner table. Instead, he listened. He smiled more. He carried a gratitude that couldn't be explained by medicine or recovery alone. Something deeper had changed. But with that change came shock. He struggled to reconcile who he had been with who he was becoming. For years, he had told others there was nothing after death. For years, he mocked those who believed in heaven and hell. And now, he had seen both shadows and light with his own soul. The memory of that torment haunted him, but the memory of being saved by Jesus overwhelmed it. He felt caught between guilt for his old life and joy for his new beginning. Nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, he replayed the moment he cried out for Jesus. That name, which once meant nothing to him, had shattered the grip of darkness. It was too real to deny. Sometimes he woke up sweating, heart pounding, remembering the suffocating void. Other times he woke in tears, remembering the peace of the light. Both memories drove him to his knees. Slowly, without even realizing it, prayer became part of his nights. Not ritual, not routine, just gratitude. Friends who visited were confused by his words. Some brushed off his story as a side effect of trauma, a hallucination from lack of oxygen. A few even laughed, the same way he once did when hearing stories of miracles. But this time, he didn't argue back. He simply said, "I know what I saw. I know who saved me." The certainty in his eyes silenced most of them. His testimony didn't need fancy words. The transformation in his heart spoke louder than arguments. He opened the Bible for the first time in decades. At first, it felt strange, almost foreign. The pages carried stories he once mocked, but now they felt alive, whispering truth. Passages about light overcoming darkness struck him deeply, as if they had been written for his very experience. He realized that what he lived wasn't just personal. It was part of a greater truth that had been there all along. Tears blurred the pages as he read, humbled by what he once rejected. The more he reflected, the more he realized how blind he had been. Pride had kept him from seeing what was right before his eyes. Knowledge had made him arrogant but not wise. It took death itself to wake him up, to strip away every illusion of control. He saw clearly now, life was not about proving God wrong, but about surrendering to his love. And though the memory of hell still haunted him, it reminded him of the grace that had pulled him out. His heart burned with a desire to share, not out of obligation, but out of love. He thought of others like him, intelligent, proud, and blind, who laughed at faith the same way he once did. They needed to know, they needed to hear that no matter how far someone runs, no matter how deep into denial they fall, one cry for Jesus can still save them. His testimony wasn't just for himself. It was a message of hope for anyone willing to listen. The transformation wasn't overnight. He still wrestled with doubt, fear, and the weight of his past. But each day the light grew stronger within him. The man who once dismissed eternity now lived every moment with eternity in mind. He was no longer just a survivor of death. He was a witness of life beyond it, living proof that God is real, merciful, and closer than he ever imagined. And that realization changed everything about who he was and who he would become. The day finally came when he could no longer keep silent. Sitting with his family in the living room, he felt a weight pressing on his chest, not of fear this time, but of conviction. With tears streaming down his face, he spoke words that surprised even him. "God gave me a second chance. I should not be here, but he pulled me out of death itself." His voice trembled, but every word carried the strength of truth. His family listened in awe, their own eyes filling with tears. He confessed how wrong he had been all those years. The pride, the mocking, the stubborn rejection of faith, all of it seemed so small compared to what he had seen and lived. "I laughed at believers," he admitted, "but now I understand. God is real. His mercy is real. "I am living proof." Saying the words out loud was like chains breaking off his heart. He no longer needed to hide behind arrogance or science alone. He had encountered something greater. The memory of the darkness still made his body shiver, but he didn't share it to scare his loved ones. He shared it to show them the contrast, the reality of what life without God meant, and the beauty of what surrender to Him brought. "When I called His name," he said softly, "everything changed. I don't deserve it, but He came for me anyway." His daughter climbed into his lap and hugged him tightly, whispering, "Daddy, I'm glad you're here." He cried harder. From that day on, his testimony became his greatest treasure. He spoke about it to friends, neighbors, even strangers when the opportunity arose. Some listened with open hearts, others rolled their eyes just as he once had. But he didn't mind. He wasn't seeking approval anymore. He was sowing seeds of truth, trusting that one day someone would remember his story, just as he remembered his grandmother's voice in the darkest place. His testimony had the power to echo the same way. Church felt strange at first. The songs, the prayers, the open talk about God. It all seemed foreign to a man who once mocked such things. Yet as he stood among believers, he realized he wasn't alone anymore. He wasn't just a survivor of a medical emergency. He was a redeemed soul, a man restored by grace. Each worship song moved him to tears. Each sermon reminded him of the mercy that had met him when he least deserved it. Publicly sharing his story wasn't easy. The first time he spoke in front of a group, his knees shook. He didn't know how to structure his words, didn't know what people expected. So he simply told the truth. He told them about his pride, his unbelief, the torment he saw, and the cry that saved him. He told them about the light that came when he had no strength left. The room grew silent, and for the first time, he realized his pain had purpose. Each time he shared, the tears flowed. But they weren't only tears of sorrow, they were tears of gratitude. He knew God had spared him not just to live longer, but to live differently. "This life is not mine anymore," he said. "It belongs to the one who gave it back to me." That conviction carried him through fear, through doubt, and through the awkwardness of speaking to others. His testimony wasn't about eloquence, it was about truth. He often thought about the irony. The man who once declared, "When you die, it's over," now stood boldly declaring life after death. The atheist who once demanded, "If God is real, let him prove it," now bore witness that God had proved it to him in the most undeniable way. That irony didn't embarrass him. It humbled him. It reminded him of the great patience of God, who had waited for him through years of rebellion and still answered his desperate call. The transformation in his life was undeniable. His family noticed it, his friends noticed it, even co-workers who had known him for years couldn't ignore it. He wasn't angry or dismissive anymore. He carried peace in his words, light in his eyes, and purpose in his actions. "What happened to you?" they would ask. And his answer was always the same. "I met Jesus when I should have been lost forever, and he gave me a second chance." He would never doubt again. The scars of that night remained, but they weren't wounds, they were reminders. Reminders that hell is real, but so is heaven. Reminders that pride nearly destroyed him, but grace restored him. Reminders that one cry, even from the lips of a stubborn skeptic, can reach the ears of God. And so with every breath he lived as a testimony, not a perfect man, not a religious showman, but a living witness that God is real, merciful, and worth trusting forever.